7 p.m. on the East Coast. It is 1 a.m. in Valencia, Spain. It is time for the Sit Down with LB. Hello, everyone. It's me, LB, Lawrence Brownlee, on location with the Sit Down with LB. I'm always happy to have people tuning in, and I hope you all will enjoy this informational and entertaining conversation I have with two fantastic people who deal with public relations and social media and marketing. Thank you, Jessica Zeller, for being there already. Jim Lieberthal, you're a constant. Every time I'm on here, you're always here. My biggest fan. I appreciate it. All of you in various places. I know I have friends all the way in Valencia, Spain that are following along tonight. And this is meant to be helpful for young singers and also people who have the interest to get into the business of, our industry. Inside the industry, this discussion that we're having to just give people information, the ins and outs, some of the things that necessarily you may not know about our business, but discussing some of the different jobs and roles, the important things in our business. And we all have very, very important jobs. And the people in public relations and marketing and social media are very, very important, especially in today, especially in a time like COVID. So we're going to discuss a lot about this very interesting subject, and I have two wonderful gentlemen that are going to be joining me for this discussion. I have Andrew Owsley from Unison Media and Frank Luzzi from Opera Philadelphia. Welcome, gentlemen, to the Sit Down with LB. How are you both?
Good. Glad to be here.
Doing well. How are you, Larry?
I'm doing well. Where are you calling in from, Andrew, if I may ask?
In Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn represents. And Frank?
I'm calling in from my kitchen in the suburbs of Philadelphia, where I've been working for almost a year now.
Well, it's your office. It doubles
Exactly.
as your office. And so, Frank's a pretty big sports fan. So he's pretty happy that his 76ers are doing pretty well right now. So, we could talk all day about, sports and fantasy football and all those other things. But today we're going to have a discussion about social media. So, you know what? Let me go really quickly. I'm going to read these guys' bios. And so you all know, what great people that we have here tonight. I'm going to start with Frank. Frank is the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Opera Philadelphia. Frank directs Opera Philadelphia's branding, sales, digital media, public relations, advertising, publications, and guest experience operation. He has led the company to international recognition from prestigious news organizations, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Opera News, The Guardian, The New Yorker, and National Public Radio. He has worked for 20 years in Philadelphia arts and culture industry, building successful campaigns and securing international media coverage as Director of Media Relations for Please Touch Museum and as a Senior Press Officer for the Philadelphia Museum of Art, working with media outlets including NBC's Today Show, CBS Sunday Morning, Entertainment Weekly, CNN, PBS, and USA Today. As a journalist, he has published more than 2,000 articles and reviews. His work has been honored by the Public Relations Society of America, the American Association of Museums, and PR News. He holds a master's degree in creative writing from the Westchester University and a bachelor's degree in journalism from Rutgers University. So that is Frank Luzzi. There you go. And I didn't know that you were a Rutgers graduate. Are you a big Rutgers sport fan as well?
I maintain my scarlet blood runs deep. Even though I'm now a Pennsylvanian for going on 3 decades, but still a Jersey boy at heart.
Yeah, well, I know you're a big sports fan and you love all that stuff. So I figured Rutgers had actually a pretty big football team not too long. I mean, Big Ten guy. So
Yeah.
But anyway, let's talk about Andrew Ousley. Andrew Ousley formed Unison Media in 2015 and rapidly established it as one of the top PR marketing companies for classical music, opera, and the performing arts. He formed the company based on the principles of honesty, transparency, and holding himself and his staff to a higher standard of results. Andrew also founded the nonprofit Death of Classical, where he curates, presents, and produces the 2 award-winning concert series, The Crypt Sessions and The Angels Share, offering classical music and opera performance in a crypt in Harlem and the catacombs of Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. DLC concerts have been included among the New York Times Best Classical Music Performances of 2017 list and featured in Vogue, Vox, the New York Times, NPR, and many, many more. Before forming Unison Media, Andrew spent a decade at the top of major record labels, working at EMI and Warner Classics, and overseeing the marketing, the promotion, publicity, and project management of 14 number 1 albums, from core classical to crossover to 50 Shades of Grey, the classical album. In his spare time, Andrew runs Burger Club, and we're going to talk about that. And his photographs have been published in the Associated Press, Newsweek, New York Magazine, and the Philadelphia Inquirer, and more. So those are my guests today. So you see, I have some very accomplished gentlemen here to discuss social media and public relations. And so let me say just a quick hello to some of my other followers: Daryl Jones, Stephen Raskauskas, Happy Day, always there, Rachel Cooper. All of you are always supporting me, so I really, really appreciate that. So let's jump right into it. Andrew, tell me, what does a publicist do?
Depends on the day, but by and large, I would say I think of publicity as storytelling.
Hello, everyone. We're back again. I'm so sorry. FYI, I have a horrible internet connection. I actually paid for high-speed service, but it's not functioning that well. So forgive me for, Andrew's answer was so good that it broke the internet. And so, Andrew, let's...
First time.
So if we get disconnected, please bear with me tonight. I'll be back in my natural habitat for the next one that's coming up later on this week. But Andrew, what does a publicist do?
I don't know where I got cut off, but basically I see publicity as ultimately about storytelling and trying to tell the most interesting story about the artist or the organization that we're representing, and to get other people to tell that story as well, whether it be media, whether it be people who have an influence on social media, or just fans or evangelists for that artist. And that's the same whether it be on social media platforms or traditional media. Basically, to me, it all boils down to storytelling.
Okay. Frank, in your job as vice president, I keep saying that, vice president of communications and marketing, what is that role, in your opinion? What does that entail?
Very similar to Andrew's answer, that it's about telling the story of what the institution is doing and engaging with an audience in a number of steps before they come into the opera house, in the case of, working in opera. It's building a relationship, telling a story, and drawing people into an experience, and hopefully drawing them back again and again for that experience. It's a little bit of publicity, it's a little bit of marketing, it's a little bit of storytelling, it's some customer service, it's all of those things. My first job at Opera Philadelphia was as director of communications, and it was very focused in the area of publicity, base and starting the brand. I came in the door, and one of the first jobs David Devan gave me was, we're going to rename the company. and we need to build a whole new reputation for this company. And let me tell you how many meetings we had, whether we were going to be Opera Philadelphia or the Philadelphia Opera. People still get it wrong. But as I've been with the company and as we've grown, my role has kind of evolved with the time, and it's all of those experience building and storytelling with the audience to let them know what they're in for.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the word branding. And this is a question I want to ask both of you. I'll ask you first, Frank. When you think about branding and the image, essentially branding is the image, the visual public image of the company and how it's perceived, how you want it to be looked upon. When you think about your role of branding, how do you approach that? Do you think of in a way that's young and hip, or do you want it to be, is it based on season to season, or is there an overall idea of how you want the company to be presented in the public's eye to your community of Philadelphia, but also internationally?
Yeah, I mean, you can have the slickest kind of branding elements, your logo, your visual identity, your content. We use the word content a lot right now, and it's changed a lot with COVID. But all of that, if it doesn't reflect the essence of who you are, it's all just packaging. So the first step in any kind of branding exercise is to figure out what's your reason for being here and why should people care about this. And that was really interesting at the time I came in at Opera Philadelphia, as the company was really moving towards this, a practice that you were very involved in, Larry, as we were moving towards commissioning new work, premiering new opera, doing opera in multiple venues and for the traditional audience, but also for new audiences, and trying to define this, what is opera in the 21st century? Is it a museum experience where you're walking in and experiencing what art was in the 19th century, or can it reflect today? So starting with that, understanding why you're here and why you're doing what you're doing, then you build out all of those kind of brand elements to put in front of people to, and there needs to be a truth to it to really build fandom, repeat engagement, and loyalty.
Yeah. And, Andrew, I wanted to ask you the same thing. When you think about, I know Frank's talking from an organizational standpoint or an institutional standpoint. The same thing with you and your artist. You represent many, many high-level and well-known artists. I work with Andrew, but I'm not one of them. I'm talking about people like Joshua Bell, Gustavo Dudamel, Janae Bridges, so many other people. What part of branding for them and their own individual idiosyncrasies or their rhythm, how do you try to bring those things together to brand them, to better represent them to the public?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with the story, like what is this artist about? And to me, I mean, branding is a word that gets just thrown around all over the place. But for me, really, it comes down, for artists, it comes down to the core points of their story, like what are the most interesting and distinguishing and distinctive aspects of what they do that only they could do. Story points and breaking them down, and then thinking at the same time through those story points, what is the visceral impact that I want this artist to have on the public. And that's the kind of thing I try to boil down to a couple of words or a couple of ideas or feelings. And then the goal of everything, publicity, marketing, social media, branding, is to get as high a percentage of the population to feel that same thing when they come into contact with these artists. And I mean, you think of the difference between like a Renee Fleming and a Pavarotti and, you know, a Lang Lang at the piano, like these very, if you ask a group of people who like classical music or opera to say 2 or 3 words to describe those artists, you would have a pretty significant overlap because those brands are strong and are agreed upon. And so to me, you determine that what is like the core essence of an artist, and then trying to make everything align with that. So the photos should reflect that. They should reflect the character of that artist and the stories you're trying to tell. The assets that you use, a written bio should reflect, it should use those words in the bio. Website should have the feel of whatever you're trying to create, whether it be intense, whether it be friendly, whether it be sort of community building. And then obviously the active publicity work should try to create stories in media outlets that tell that story of the artist, and then the social media should build that a community that also both receives information about those stories from the artists and then goes on to tell them and spread them and share them. And so to me, that's really the core of what branding is for a musician, for how we approach it with artists.
You know, Andrew and I have worked together for several years now, and the thing that I have noticed about our relationship, our business relationship, is that anything that's planned, there's a lot of thought put into it. It's not something that's off the cuff. Even something that I'll say, let's do this, is always kind of like taken to say, okay, wait, let's discuss every aspect of this. You know, it's not just like get it out and do it. It's just like before we get it out there on the internet or out in print or out in this, even as far as like getting down to the details sometimes of photo shoots, what stuff to wear and styling and how to do this and everything else. There's a lot of stuff that goes in there. And I don't think everyone takes into account how much thought is important because of the things you just mentioned. Would you just talk about the thinking and the intellectual aspect of it to make sure that what we see in the public is well thought out and not just, hey, I got this idea and just put it on before we really think the thing through?
100%. And I mean, that is in a lot of ways the difference between having a publicist or working with a publicist versus doing it yourself is, my job is to think that through and to make sure that anything that goes out into the world is the best possible representation of the artist. And I mean, you're a great example. The work we've done, I mean, to me, going back to that idea of branding and story points, there are a few pretty concentrated ones. Obviously, you're the best bel canto tenor in the world. You're not going to admit to that, but like that's just kind of I will. Well, no, let's be gentle, but that's sort of one part of your story, and that's a great part, and it's a part that so many people respond to. But particularly in recent years, with some of the work you did with Tyshawn Sori Song Cycle, where we worked together, Frank at Opera Philadelphia, you have begun to emerge as a force of activism in opera and of having new works as well as old works, like speak to the relevant and current moments in American culture, in your life. And then there is also a part of you that is trying to bring people together in opera and try to create more of a feeling of community, and to try to always be a force for good for younger singers, for all the different singers in the community. And so I think something like the Sitdown, for instance, what you've been doing with this series, is about that. It's about creating a sense of community. It's about having these conversations that are honest, that are welcoming, but that are sometimes address hard topics. And that's something that you're good at. You're an incredibly, you have a great personality and a great love of people. So this to me was something that kind of spoke to some of those strengths and those unique aspects of your personality, but we wanted to do it right and to have the right name for it, have the right schedule in place, have the right rollout on your social media channels, on your website, to the press, and so on. So all of that had to be done in a focused way. When you were doing Cycles of My Being, we did a new photo shoot for that because we needed some new photos, but also because that was going to be such a huge and focused project for several years, and something that was very different from what you had done before. So, for instance, a lot of your photos previously had been a bit lighter, a bit more sort of a bit of a more happy energy, which
jovial.
Is your default state, right? You're a jovial guy, unless your sports team isn't performing. But this was something. This was a piece of music that dealt with some very, very intense, difficult subjects, and this idea of you and Tyshawn and Terrence. What is it to be a black man in America in present day, and see people around you being killed for the color of their skin in 2016, 2017, and that's a hard subject. And so we needed to get photos that reflected that gravitas and that sense of struggle with these difficult themes. And so that was why we worked on the styling. We worked on picking a photographer who could get that grit, that feel, and putting together a mood board that brought together looks and general kind of emotional visual worlds that we felt reflected that, you and I and the team. And then we did the shoot and we managed it, and we kept, when you had a look with that leather jacket look, which was just a great look, and you were feeling it, and we kept doing that till we got the photo we got, which I thought was a pretty perfect representation of that piece of music and what you were trying to achieve with it. And so then we could have both the visuals, the music, the storytelling all be aligned perfectly. And that was the goal of that.
Yeah, it's important to have a well thought out idea of what you want to do and how you're represented. The same thing with you, Frank. Nothing is just, I think it 1 second and then it's out there. There is a process that happens because it has to be approved, but it has to be well thought out, well rolled out, and everything else. Would you talk about that, especially representing, Opera Philadelphia?
Yeah, I mean, Cycles of My Being was a really good example. And how lucky was I to get to work with the two of you on that project. And everything Andrew just described, as we started our work together, I saw that, I recognized the thought that you had put into all of those elements. And I thought, okay, this is a special project because there's a truth here. There's a, this, you've done this thinking, and you want to bring a genuine story to an audience through this project, or through multiple audiences. We were lucky to be the first in Philadelphia, but it went to several cities, and that level of thought that goes into those kinds of elements is a dream. Like frequently I've talked to colleagues about how we interact with our artists, our artist representatives, and collaborate in putting these stories out to the world, to the media, to audiences. And there's got to be a lot of listening on our end as a company. Like, we can't foist upon you, okay, we want to put you in a role that we think you should be in. We want to hear from you what it is you're trying to achieve in this artistic experience with our company, and be true to that, and tell a genuine story and create a genuine experience. And that's why, that's what I'm most proud of, the work that we've done together, the three of us, but also more broadly. Like, I frequently will talk about an artist will come to me and ask questions on the publicity side, or they'll be like, I'm thinking of starting to work with a publicist, and like, is that okay? Like, how do you interact with them? And I'm like, absolutely. Like, we are all here to support you, to tell your story, and to make this great. I don't know if I answered the question, but I went on a little rant there. I tend to.
No. No, it was good. And, it's interesting that I hear you talking about the work that you do together, the two of you, and how all three of us have made things go so well amongst the three of us. Would you both talk about how important it is to be able to have that good working relationship, how you, Andrew, as a publicist, and also you, Frank, as an organizational, institutional guy, to have someone that you feel like you understand each other, you respect and understand the roles, the different roles that you have with representing artists, representing companies, for example, even how bios and pictures are represented, how you can really work to have the best possible outcome because the other person on the other side is doing their job at a very high level. Would you talk about that, Andrew, first, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think obviously it's it's important to work together and to align goals, because at the end of the day, the institution has different goals often than the individual, or the goals aren't 100% aligned, because the institution ultimately is the goal of it is to promote the institution as a whole. Of course, that involves the artists and the projects, but as an individual, as a publicist for an individual artist, my goal is to get the most publicity for the artists that I represent. And there are some times when those two goals are at odds. For instance, if there is a bigger story about this opera, or there are other artists who that the institution wants to support and to publicize, either bigger roles or more aligned with the goals of the institution. So to me, it's important to always understand and respect that and do the best I can for my artists without being annoying or ruining the plans of the institutions, because at the end of the day, without the institutions in our industry, nobody gets paid, nobody survives, and the industry goes away. As we see with COVID, it's a major problem with this. And so, trying to maximize what I can do for the artists and to help with the institution's goals too, but just being realistic sometimes that those aren't always 100% aligned, but also just trying to make sure that they have the assets that they need, that they have the info they need, that they're clear on the storylines from our side, that are the most interesting storylines about the artist, in relation to this project and in general, and that we're helping. Because obviously the other thing with opera companies is that sometimes you're promoting several projects at once, and as superhuman as you are, Frank, you still have 24 hours in the day, and I always my team and I were always like, hey, we get that you have other things to do. If we can help, we can pitch these people, we can take on these things. Part of my goal is also just being there to help if it is needed, and to pitch where we can to just make the entire performance run or project a success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Frank?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, other than in the biggest companies, a lot of times there is one person who is trying to run the social media channels, pitch the local and national media some stories, sell the tickets, make sure the box office is working, juggling a lot of different things, and they don't have the capacity to do all of it, or to focus in on even if it's a really, really good story about one of the artists in the show, that it might not float to the level of time that they're going to have to invest in getting that story told. So when you have an asset, whether it's the artist themselves or the artist has a also superhuman publicist like Andrew, to tell those stories, sometimes it's our job as the institution to get out of the way. I am never precious with if you're coming into my city and my company and like, hey, I want to approach this local news person that you probably have a relationship with because I have a specific story about my artist, I'm going to know that you're going to be the person that's best to tell that, and I'm going to get out of the way and say, go for it. Like, I may have other things I'm talking to that person about, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't also hear from you. So yeah, like I'm very much not a we do things a certain way kind of person, and I think I've been allowed to be that way because we're not that company in Philadelphia. We're always looking for the better way to do something, and that usually begins with collaboration across the board.
Here's a question for you, Frank. What happens when you have an artist or their representative that comes to you and they say, use this photo, and that's the only one we want you to use, and they're half naked, or it's something that just is absolutely, completely contrary to what Opera Philadelphia is trying to do? What do you do?
like that one of Larry I sent you a couple of years back.
Oh, right, yeah, that one.
Where I had the exposed thigh. Yes.
Right,
what do you do? What do you do with that? I mean, because I'm sure your business that probably has happened, yeah, right, where someone really tries to force how they are represented in the company.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been very lucky. I haven't faced a situation quite like that yet. I've definitely had. I mean, the worst I've had where it's like, this is like a tiny photo. It's not going to print in our program. It's not going to be like reusable. Like, I need something higher resolution. I've had that conversation a ton. But I mean, hypothetically, again, there's a conversation to be had. If you are playing the role of, if you're a nun in Dialogues of the Carmelites and you want to use this like very racy photo, it might not make sense to use that. So let's have a conversation about how how we resolve this. I find that you can usually talk through these things and get to the point of like, what are your goals? What are our goals? How can we bring them together and everybody wins?
Yeah. And Andrew, if you have an artist,
our answer, but
yeah, no, I mean that's a great answer. Andrew, you have an artist that you represent, and they're like, every picture you pick, they don't like, and they're like, I like this one, and they're looking away from the camera, or they're doing something that is absolutely in your line of work and your expertise. It doesn't represent them as well as it could. What do you do? Is that still the same idea of the conversation, or are you like, look, let me do my job as publicist?
I mean, I generally am pretty, as you know very well, Larry, I speak my mind, and I have my opinions, but I also have a reason for all of my opinions. And, again, when you wanted to do that entire series of thong shots, I said no.
It was a good idea.
It wasn't right for the album.
It was a good idea. I'm like,
it wasn't right.
The fig leaf. The fig leaf is gonna come back at some point.
Yeah, okay? It was an interesting concept, but no, like when absolutely, and there are many times when artists want to do something or want to use an asset that I don't feel is aligned with the story that I'm trying to tell about them, and with the public profile that they are creating for themselves, and that's a conversation that we have, and I give my reasons. I mean, at the end of the day, like, if they want to use something or they want to talk about something, I can't stop them, but I will always say what I think and do my best to dissuade, because that's one of the reasons why they work with me, because to have that second opinion, and particularly the opinion of somebody whose job is to be plugged in to the industry and to the media and to have a finger on the pulse. This is especially true in a lot of ways of social media, where artists there are a great many artists who, I hate to say it, but who damage their careers and their public profiles by putting out bad content on their social media channels, or content that doesn't reflect them in the best way. And I constantly have writers, have producers come to me and say, man, I really like this guy, but I just don't like his social media. It kills me. And so this is something that was one of the reasons why I do the social media for the people that we do publicity with, and we work with them on that as well as publicity. Because to me, everything that is in the public sphere is a part of your publicity. It's a part of your public relations, how you relate and how you are seen by the public. And so if one of those is jarringly different from all of the others, then like one photo or one video or one social media post, then it's going to affect the storytelling, and it's going to affect how people view you. So my job is really, I see, is to unify all of those different elements and make them coherently centered around a single story around that artist and the best version of that artist. And that's,
here's a question for you, Andrew, because as we know that social media is oftentimes half private and half professional. And so sometimes merging the two of those worlds are not the same. If you have all of your professional content when you're doing shows and you're announcing something, the backstage of something and all these other things, and then the next photo right beside it or the next post is you sitting bikini clad on an island somewhere in the south of Italy, completely getting hammered or something like that, that is private. You should be able to have your private life and do those things. How do you find that balance? Because again, usually people don't have a fan page, or they do have a fan page, but it's usually one page that has everything in it. So that's sometimes a tightrope to walk, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And obviously publicity is something that is, and the sort of marketing assets are things that are controlled. Like if the photos in a photo shoot, nothing leaves that photo shoot unless it's approved, unless it's, sent out and disseminated. No press releases go out, as Frank well knows, without about 6,000 people reading them and vetting them. And so these things are controlled. Social media, part of the reason why it's so powerful is because it is this combination of professional and personal, and it gives this more three-dimensional side of an artist.
Insight.
And private and personal, but it has to be balanced, because at the end of the day, as artists, you are a public figure, and unless all of your social media channels are set to private, then you are a public figure on those channels, and what you put out there is a part of your career and your art and what your art says. And so while it is important to have personal content on there that reflects who you are and your character, it is important to make sure that it is, as you said, it is aligned with the storytelling, and that it is appropriate, and that it is the best reflection of your character. And it's interesting because a lot of artists, especially younger artists that I'll work with, I'll do like consulting or seminars for, and some of them will say, like, they'll bristle at the idea of publicity and branding because it feels like a cheapening of themselves, or like a oversimplification or a selling out. And it's really, to me, it's not. It's a distillation, because at the end of the day, you cannot ever put the total, complete representation of your humanity and your life and your personality out there into the world, because it's just too much. It would take, everybody would have to be your friend for years to understand who you actually are. So part of publicity is distilling what aspects of you and your personality go out into the world, and that people see and engage with, because so that it's only the most interesting and the most relevant to whatever you're trying to say artistically. So that social media is one of the most important parts of social media, is that managing to still maintain that focus of storytelling while still having this mix of personal and professional content. And obviously that's true on the institutional side too, to some degree, where, especially with something like Opera Philadelphia, Frank, where you guys are not just like a boring institution. You guys have a lot of character and personality.
And Frank, how much of that private life, fun aspect of who you are, how much of that do you want in your job as Vice President of Communications and Marketing? You want to bring in that human story element, or something that someone does in their private life to kind of bolster their engagement with Opera Philadelphia in that time? For example, I know for like Lisette Oropesa, who's a dear friend of mine, and yours as well. She is a big marathon runner. And that human story aspect of who she is, that oftentimes plays into your job, and it helps to get some traction. Yes.
Right. You want, when we first meet any artist who comes through the door at Opera Philadelphia, they'll get an artist packet, and there's like a big staff meet and greet, and there's a social media tip sheet in there. There's some do's and don'ts. And basically we're saying, like, we want you to talk about your experience with this company. We want you to share and show people what your time at Opera Philadelphia has been. There's some things in there about, like if you're going to be recording something in a rehearsal, make sure you have the other person's permission before you post it. If you're going to be taking any images, make sure you've shown them to anybody who's in it before it goes out there. Like just the kind of just to be a good colleague, so that it's not like you're posting something. Hey,
common sense.
Look what backstage. Isn't this embarrassing? And then but we do say, like, hey, we don't want to control this. We want to show some of it, but yeah, like, you're a public figure, and that makes us as an institution all public figures to some level. And so, like, I frequently tell people, like, before you push post, like, ask yourself why. Like, why are you doing this? What do you want the person all the people on the other end to get from this? And just be sure that you're doing this. It's this whole idea of, like, of what PR is and who gets to tell your story. Social media has changed all that. You can tell a lot of your own story. This show is a perfect example of that. I think a lot of people had opinions of you, Larry, like maybe had met you, have heard you sing, and feel like I know who Lawrence Brownlee is. And through watching this show, I think more people are saying, I feel like I know Lawrence Brownlee. Like, I know what makes him tick. I know what he thinks about. And that's powerful. That goes beyond branding and publicity and all that. And that's just human connection, right? So, but when you're a young artist and you're just starting out, and maybe you feel a bit of I need to keep up with these more established artists who are doing things, and I need to do certain things. I just am always like, just take a breath, figure out what you're trying to achieve, and then go for it. And I frequently tell artists, when you go into a company for the time, introduce yourself to the social media person, introduce yourself to the PR people, be an asset, offer to be an asset. We're frequently looking for help. I frequently will hand over our Instagram channel and have artists take it over, and they'll post content from behind the scenes that is fun and engaging and on brand for them. Kevin Burdett's was like, when he did it, it was just hilarious, and lots of time around town with his daughter. Anthony Roth Costanzo turned it into performance art. His time on our Instagram chat. So, go for it, but also, just again, like, don't just boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
That can get you in some trouble sometimes.
Yeah, Rachel Cooper said common sense, which I think is, I think people don't, yeah, courtesy, common courtesy. I don't think people realize the value in that even today. It's an old adage, common sense, and so we need to use that. Here's a question. Nate Snyder asked a question. Has social media's importance changed during COVID as we are not able to represent our personality in person? Who wants to take a stab at that?
Frank, you want to go first?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, again, here we are. I think as an industry, we've had to just totally go, okay, wait a minute. Like, we're not live in front of people in the way we normally are, but that's what we do. We gather up together and we share this wacky art form that we love. And we've all had to like slam the brakes on, not even like ease in. We slammed the brakes on. And so what were the opportunities available to us, right? So here we are. You started to sit down in June, I think, and like, I've been a big fan of what like Karen Slack has a conversation where she's really just been addressing some of the issues she wants to address and bringing guests on and having important conversations, because there's a moment now where we can, because we're not racing around from city to city and doing what we normally do. There's a moment to reflect on again, the why, asking a lot of why questions, and a lot of artists are doing that. Dallas Opera completely just turned everything over to artists to have conversations on the Dallas Opera Network. What we've done at Opera Philadelphia, it's like, okay, we can't gather audiences, so we're going to launch a OTT platform, and we're going to safely film art and deliver it to you, because we want to still have that engagement. And not everybody can launch a talk show, a production, or whatever. So even if you're just keeping up with people through Instagram or Twitter or whatever, I think it's important, and it's how we maintain connections with people.
Andrew?
Yeah. I mean, I think from a individual artist standpoint, it's hugely important, because it is the only thing at this point that you can really do to create a story around yourself. And to me, social media for artists, really, I view it as the building of a community around yourself, and people who are engaged and who are invested in you as an artist, as a human being, and who are interested and passionate about what you do and want to stay up to date on it. And with performances gone, social media has become really one of the only places, if not the only place, where you have a platform still to do things, to connect people via a conversation series like this, and like what you were mentioning, Frank, launching videos, creating videos and launching them, and trying to create excitement and traction around that. And if publicity ultimately is about also storytelling, but building momentum around that story and excitement and growth, social media has been it's the only way for artists who otherwise see that momentum stop dead in its tracks in March of last year. Now they can continue to build momentum and awareness through social media, and things like this series, like that LA Opera talk, which we with you and Janae and a bunch of other amazing people. Videos, some of those orchestra videos performing in separate, filmed in their apartments one by one, and then mosaic put together. Lift Every Voice and Sing one that Nicole Houston did. Things that have become huge moments of both social media, like awareness and engagement, but also traditional media have come into those and spoken about those moments. And so it has continued to build the public profile of these artists by what they do on social media. That does require focused execution and rollout. It requires figuring out, if you don't have a huge platform on your social channels, as many artists don't, how can you leverage other people's platforms who have big ones and to get the word out to a larger audience, and then to do publicity. Like, how do you get media interested? And that's obviously for people who don't have publicists or publicity and social media people. But to me, it has been, in a lot of ways, the only way to get momentum and continue to build momentum and tell your story.
One aspect of social media is the amount of content you put out there. Some people get into overkill. They completely flood the market. They don't pace things out really well. It's like a whole bunch of stuff all at once, and then nothing for like 2 months, and then just a whole bunch of stuff. Would you talk about pacing? How important it is to be intentional in how you put information out there?
Yeah, I'm happy to say this, but Frank, I would love to hear your view as like an institution on some of the social channels that you encounter for artists who are performing with you. But from my side, actually doing social media and working with artists directly on it, I am a firm believer that you put out content when there is good content. There is nobody in the world of opera, from the top classical music, period. Opera is a subgenre of classical music. There is nobody who is sitting at their computer waiting for the next post from a classical musician or an opera singer. It's just, there are very, very few, and that's not a slight to the great artists in our field. It's the nature that it's a niche. Miley Cyrus has a gajillion followers. Like, there are D-level pop singers who have more than the top 10 biggest social media accounts in opera combined. And that's just the nature of being a part of a niche. And so to me, it's not about the numbers, it's about the engagement of those numbers. And that engagement and that community comes of putting out good content, not putting out content every day because your audience has this voracious, insatiable appetite for posts from you. So I am a firm believer, and again, this is my philosophy, and not everybody agrees with me on this, not every social media and publicist, but I feel pretty strongly about that. You put out content when there is good content and there are important stories to tell, and you put that content out authentically. I'm also a firm believer in not doing the kind of influencer style, especially with Instagram, where every post has a certain frame and a word and a font and a specifically branded thumbnail. That works for influencers who are trying to get 20 million followers for their makeup tutorials. But for an artist, for a musician, for a performer, like, it is not about creating that veneer of influencerdom. It is about breaking down the veneer and allowing your fans and your supporters to get closer to you. And something like this, which is it's polished, obviously, because you know how to do your film and AV equipment, Larry. But it's
not today,
it's still
in a hotel.
Very you can't win them all. But I think, to me, again, that's like social media. Both the frequency and the honesty of it are things that are different from in our world, our niche of classical music and opera, compared to if you were trying to be, a fashion influencer, or if you were trying to be a pop star. So, those are, to me, practical differences. But I would love to hear, Frank, your thoughts, being on the other side of this, but dealing with a lot of individual social media accounts for artists.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think and it's true for companies as well as for individual artists. There are peaks and valleys of activity when there is an opportunity to create a lot of content because you're in rehearsal or you're getting ready for an opening night or whatever. But yes, step one, like, you put content out when it's good content and it's shareable. we try as a company to engage with artists not only in the moment that they're with us, whether we're like workshopping a new work, and even then it's kind of, like what can you share, what can you not share when you're kind of developing something. But at the very least, we say, hey, here we are, we're developing something new. Stay tuned for the official announcement. But then, it might be 6 months before you're actually going to bring that to the stage. But in the meantime, an artist has some other project going on. So we're very open when an artist says, hey, I have something that I'm sharing. It doesn't directly relate to what I'm doing with you at some point, but would you like to share this with your audience? And usually the answer is yes, because I want our audience to know the artist who's coming at some point for whatever the opera or the project may be. But yes, step one, it's do you have a story to tell? I remember speaking on a panel at an Opera America conference years ago, and one of the questions was, should our opera company have a blog, or should we have a podcast, or should we have whatever? And my answer was, do you have something to say? If you have something to say in a podcast, launch a podcast. If you think you should launch a podcast because other companies have podcasts, then you don't have enough for a podcast. So start with what it is you want to talk about. And if there's a there.
I follow, I'm like the doctor, the Hippocratic Oath. I think it's the Hippocratic Oath. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, but the do no harm. Like, if your social media is not going to be great, or is going to be okay, or you're just doing it because you feel like you should do it, don't do it. Do it when you have something to say. And then there are going to be moments when you have a ton of posts and a ton of stuff to say. And again, then there will be ebbs and flows. And there were a lot of artists when COVID first hit, who, even ones that we do social media for, but also people I consult with, who were like, do I need to post? I really don't feel like it. My entire industry has collapsed. My livelihood is in this crazy moment. And I said, no, you don't need to post. Take time for yourself, stay off social media, and then we can do this whenever. Facebook, unfortunately, is not going anywhere anytime soon. For society and mental health, it's unfortunate.
I will say, Andrew, though, while I agree with you on there are things influencers do that don't apply to our industry, I'm a big fan of looking what people in other industries do and thinking about when it applies to ours. And looking for hey, what's the opera version or the classical music version of this?
Angles.
Practices too.
Yeah, exactly. So and there's no crazy idea. I mean, as we've been toying or launching the Opera Philadelphia channel and thinking about what an OTT platform means in opera long term. Yes, I've been looking at what some other just plain music organizations do, or classical music organizations do, but I've also looked at some of the biggest successes in the OTT world, like professional wrestling. And don't get me started on my treatise of how opera and professional wrestling are not that different than people think. There's a lot of similarities, but there are some best practices that they've created that I've tried to mimic. So,
Frank, I have a question for you. I'm sorry. Did you want to stay on that subject?
No. I was just saying, I agree 100% with that. Always look for best practices in mainstream industries.
Frank, here's a question for you. In your role as Vice President of Communications and Marketing, do you ever feel like you are the voice of the company? And the reason I said that is because, we recently, in the last 6 to 8 months, we've had a lot of social things that have happened. And, a lot of companies have wanted to make statements in support of things. We just came through a very contentious political season where there was a lot out there. And some people, when we talk about people not working and, artists not being supported, and institutions want to make statements, and they put them on their Instagram pages or on social media. Do you feel a huge responsibility as being essentially the voice of a company especially now in COVID times, to make always to not ever misstep, but to put the right content out there?
Definitely. And, yeah, there are various times where I am the voice of the institution. There are other people who are the voice of the institution. I'll shout out Shannon Evelyn, who runs our social media channels on a day-to-day basis. She frequently is the voice of the institution. I think we've, as a staff, we've kind of come up with what the institutional voice is, and sometimes different people are driving. But yes, following the murder of George Floyd, there was a rush to put statements out, and a lot of those statements they read as rushed, and they didn't read as thoughtful, and they read as we're keeping up. And that came across my to-do, where it was kind of like, we need to have a statement, and then we need to have a content strategy for this going forward. And I took that, and then I waited an hour, and then I turned around and I said, no, this is not a time for content strategy. This is a time for us to think about who we are as an institution. And there's a bigger strategy that we need to implement. This is not a time for content. And so, but again, we were kind of like, to say nothing was not
an option.
And so we landed with kind of a statement that talked about how statements weren't enough, and like a starting point instead of today we feel a need to put a statement out and then we'll be done thinking about this. Like, no, we're going to agonize over this. We're going to be thoughtful with the statement, and we're going to let we're going to be, and it's transformed our institution, the work we're doing, and we'll continue to do. So yeah, like it's an interesting time for that side of like the PR world. Like just putting statements out or just switching your
status
profile picture to a black screen. We got to get past that. We got to go deeper.
Yeah,
Andrew, and I mean, please, I want you to jump into that question as well. But also, when people, for example, put a Black Lives Matter thing on their page, which is half professional, half personal, and how that reads all these statements and how we feel this rush to do something because everybody's doing it. It's the end thing to do. Would you talk about that as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, going from what Frank was saying, that on the institutional level, this is something that we deal with on a personal level with artists, and particularly around George Floyd and Black Lives Matter protests. I am keenly aware, especially in my work with you, with Janae, with John Holiday, I'm a white man, and like many of the people on these episodes in our industry, who on the institutional and administrative and work side of our industry are white, and I am not qualified to address this or to be your mouthpiece for this without getting you to tell me what you are feeling and what you are thinking. And so to me, it's always important that I feel like I am representing the artists 100% accurately and with their personality and their values. But in issues like this that are not only obviously contentious and are incredibly, and politics as well, but that can be divisive to people and intense and triggering, but also that are just deeply personally important to you as artists and as people. It is so important for me to just shut up and listen and like let you tell me what you want to say, and then I just figure out how technically to post it in the best ways and so on. But that's something that I think, especially as you said, through these last few years and months of politics, of protest, and just the challenges, the psychological and real, like just structural challenges of COVID, to listen and to the artists and try to understand what they're feeling and what they're thinking before we say anything on their behalf.
Going a little bit further, you mentioned something. You said this political season, and okay,
The weeds of it now, Larry.
okay. Hey, this is not. This is supposed to be unfiltered, right? We're supposed to be honest and straightforward. It is clear that many people in our industry are not. We're not happy with the former regime in the White House, and a lot of people have been incredibly vocal. And their statuses on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, maybe even TikTok, they all have expressed that pretty firmly, pretty publicly. And I myself, I'll be honest, and I've heard people say, leave politics out of your art. Don't talk about this. How do we navigate that as artists? Because some things we feel strongly about, and I want you to jump in there too, Frank, because obviously everybody that subscribes to Opera Philadelphia, you have a wide swath of people from different political walks of life, and how that is really a minefield to try to navigate that when something is so touchy. We know that a lot of people have lost friends and families over the subject of politics, and that in social media, because it's such a hot, it's a lightning rod of activity, but also polarization and really going to the fringes, and there is no coming together. How do we navigate that? Because there are a lot of times that I got on and I was like, I can't stand this guy. I'll be honest, I said it. And I said, someone said to me, leave politics out of this, or don't come on here talking about politics. Could both of you talk about that, because it's important, I think, don't you think?
100%. I mean, and this is one of those areas, especially where the personal and the professional side of your social media have to be considered, because politics ultimately it's about your personal values and your personal beliefs, but especially with Trump, it has become an aspect of people's identity. And I know I have a lot of people whose families are, even though I myself am not, were huge Trump supporters, still are. And so to me, the question is, if you are going to put it on your professional public-facing channels, these opinions, first question I ask is, what is it doing for your story? Do you want to become a truly politically driven public figure and an artist? Are you going to do projects that engage with politics in a partisan capacity? Are you going to make this a major part of your storytelling in an ongoing way? And then secondly, and if not, then hey, maybe you keep that on the personal side. Like, there are a lot of personal things that don't get talked about because they're just not relevant to your professional storytelling. But if the answer to those questions is yes, this is something that I want to talk about and that I want to engage with, then to me it just must be done with empathy and with care for the people who do not share your views and your values. And like, people there's this view that everybody who supports Donald Trump is like, some just a racist or a moron, and it's just not the case. There are intelligent people who have just built their identities around the ideas that he espouses, some for better, some for worse. But like,
just a few of them, or just a few. I mean, a lot of people are like, they're like anti-abortion and very religious, and that's the reason why they vote.
Yeah, fiscally they agree with what's going on. So I think, and it's important. So it's important to do that with empathy, and that can be hard. And that's, again, it's another reason why people have publicists as a filter. But because I can sort of take that extra step and say, let's just take 10 deep breaths and then say this again. And because politics is so emotional, and especially in recent days. But again, to me, it is always important to, when you are a public figure and you are speaking to a large fan base, and one that is all over the place and diverse, to speak with empathy and with understanding, because if you're just shouting out more noise around politics, are you helping? I don't think so, personally. And again, this is my own personal values that filter into the work I do, but I would rather be silent than contribute to an unhelpful cacophony.
Frank, there's an understanding, or I think a belief that most of the people that work in our industry are probably more leaning liberal. I think that's probably understandable in the offices.
All the donors, not all the donors.
Not all the donors in our industry, in the sense like, the people who work inside the industry, not the donors, are usually liberal, and then the donors tend to sway more conservative. And so even if from our standpoint we want to do something and we're all like, we're in the echo chambers or we're preaching to the choir, yes, you have to be keenly aware of the fact that that stuff doesn't fly, because we know that we're usually playing to potentially a different fan base. Yes?
Yes, absolutely. And, I've been a big believer in, you're not going to change somebody's mind or heart in the comments field. So I definitely steer away from those, online debates back and forth with people personally. Institutionally, I don't know in the last 5 years if even though the lowercase word Trump has appeared on any of our channels. We tended to stay out of politics from an institutional channel, but certainly personally, artists, employees, just people in the opera and classical music world, we talk about how this is all impacting us. And it's, you don't want to encourage someone to say like, well, don't express your truth, because it may conflict with the truth of someone who doesn't look like you, or is an important person in an institution in whatever way. Like we know we all don't see the world exactly the same. We all come from different backgrounds. We all have different life experiences. And it's really a fraught time of trying to engage on these subjects in a way that doesn't turn into the cacophony that Andrew, best word of the night so far.
That's a luxury word.
There's a whole industry built on these divisive conversations, and getting us to go to war with one another. And
right,
yeah, it's a hard thing, because it's ironic that I frequently will talk to people about use social media to express your truth, but there's a whole industry based in social media that's about destroying truth.
Yeah.
So how do those things come together?
Yeah, and I mean, to me,
I wish I had the answer.
But I mean, yeah, it's also, there's a values thing, right? I'm in classical music. I mean, nobody gets into opera or classical music for the money. That's for damn sure. I'm in it. I'm in it because this is something that I believe in. I believe it makes the world a better place, and I believe it brings us together, and it shows us what unifies us as human beings, and what transcends the petty everyday of things like politics. And so, while obviously it is important to engage with politics when there is an artistic statement that must be made in that way, and then, for instance, Cycles of My Being, that is a political statement as much as it is an artistic one, but it is one that is done with great thought and great empathy and great emotional honesty. But at the end of the day, that just making noise that's the purview of the media outlets that, frankly, I think are a harm to society more often than they are a good at this point in time. And so I would rather focus my work and the energies and attentions of my artists and their public-facing profiles on the things that unite us and that actually make the world a better place rather than a louder and more angry place.
You know what I've done? I've tried to take this kind of formula with my social media. I usually try on my Facebook personal page, I put little professional content on there. It's usually social, it's playful. We're talking about sports and fantasy football and everything else on Facebook personal page. On Instagram, which is largely, again, I would say half and half, professional and personal, I usually don't put anything about politics or anything about various subjects, because that is something I think now that Instagram is more of the wider viewed platform of all of them right now. I know people engage in Facebook, but I think Instagram is where people passing by is a lot more engaged in Instagram, so I leave that there. Twitter is like almost all professional. It's like all professional. So it's like fanbook face page, Facebook fan page is all professional. Facebook personal page is all personal, and then the divvying up of the would you advise people to kind of like take that formula, or what do you think is the best way to have something where they understand something is purely professional and something else is more social, or there's a division between what you put on there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think somebody was mentioning this in the comments, doesn't everybody all have a personal and a professional page? For Facebook, yes, because, and this is part of this is technical, it's the structural aspects of the platforms. Facebook made it initially easy to have a personal Facebook profile that was more private and more people had to friend you to see the content and so on. And then a professional page that was completely public and accessible to anybody. Instagram doesn't have that divide as neatly as Facebook does. And so while there are artists who create a personal account that is private and locked unless they approve you, and then a professional one that's open to the public, that is also, you begin to pretty severely compete with yourself for numbers and fans, and you divide your fan base and your community, which again, the whole point of it is to unify a community around yourself. Twitter, nobody freaking understands anyway these days, unless you're, if you don't get it, and Twitter's dumb. If you get it, Twitter's amazing. But like, that's really, for most artists, that's simply if they're not engaging in the conversations that are on Twitter only, then it's just a news source for the professional. So that breakdown is generally how we do it for most of our artists, because we don't want two different accounts for all of these platforms. And my advising is just on your Facebook personal, as long as it's private, do whatever you want. Post photos of your kitten 20 times a day. I don't care. But like on your professional page, like that should be controlled. And then Instagram, as you said, it is the most ascendant platform, widely adopted platform. TikTok, but who the hell knows how TikTok works? It just makes me feel old. Like Instagram is where most people are, and so you want to capture that community and speak to it and build engagement with it. And if you split that out between a professional and a personal private page, it can be difficult to do that. So I generally encourage artists to only have one Instagram account and just be a little more discerning of what they put on that and careful.
Yeah, Frank?
Larry, back to the point you had made earlier, people who follow you, engage with you on social media, they want to get to know you because they're a fan of your work. That's got to be a two-way relationship. To then say to you, leave politics out of it. I'm only interested in you as my, as an outlet for my opera and classical music love. Yeah, then you're not a real person. If you're hurting the day after someone who looks like you was senselessly murdered by police while people watched, and you're hurting from that, and you're going to share that, the person on the other end, if that is uncomfortable for them, if that is, opening their eyes to something that maybe they don't want to think about, that's on them. That's not on you.
Yeah, and there are moments when, and at the end of the day, every artist is a human being, and if there are moments where the need to say something is so great that even if I think it's not the best move from a PR standpoint, from a social standpoint, I'm going to step back. Like, and like it is your right to say what you want to say at the end of the day. And I mean, for instance, I think back, Larry, on when you were singing the national anthem with the Jets and you wanted to say something that with Colin Kaepernick, but you were also torn because of, you know, your father being a vet and your respect for America and for what the flag actually represents, you know, from a patriotic standpoint, but also obviously this understanding and belief in what Colin Kaepernick was doing and protesting against. And, you know, you said you wanted to say something about that and to do something, and taking the statement that you wrote and putting it out on your channels and putting it out to media, but having that really be something that you just felt you could not be silent on. And so my job was just to figure out how to get it out there again in a way where the message was I think most constructive and most helpful to people at that time on both sides of that debate, to understand where you were coming from. So again, to me, at the end of the day, artists and humans, you know, you're artists, you're humans. Like, if you want to say something, say it at the end of the day, but think about it.
And it goes back to this idea of being thoughtful. You know, if a lot of people try to hijack the narrative a lot of times, and a lot of people say things because they just don't want to feel uncomfortable. They don't want to, so they're telling you to not put something on there because they feel uncomfortable. And they're trying to control you because they want to feel at peace. But they're okay with you having the turmoil, having the hardship, not being able to sleep because someone that looks like you, or, you know, a lot of people who have families that, you know, with immigration, and some of the families that have been shipped back to Mexico, or, you know, or a woman's right to choose. You know, these people, you know, their reproductive rights is very important to them. Someone comes in and says, don't say anything about them. And you're like, you know what? I struggle with this, or, you know, I feel strongly that this is my decision. And so I think if you have this idea of thought, how you put everything out there, I think even if someone's uncomfortable, it's okay. But it is quite easy also to get into these back and forths, you know, and especially as, you know, artists sometimes with some people who are very opinionated, self-made critics. For an artist to go in and go after some of these people who voice their opinions. Does anybody want to take a stab at that? Maybe I'll duck at you guys.
No, I mean, again, to me, it comes down to, at the end of the day, also there's the reality that you're a public figure ultimately because you're an artist and because you're a singer, you make music that affects people, and not because you're a politician or because you're a political, you know, talking head expert. And so there is a question to me as well of, like, is there a better way to make this statement? And you're an artist. Like, my thought is always, how can you say this through your art, through your music? And, you know, when you wanted to say something first about Black Lives Matter, and, you know, we said, okay, well, let's actually do something musical about this. And that was that NPR video in the crypt with Jason Moran doing There's a Man Going Around Taking Names, which is way more powerful than any written Facebook post could have been about that what was happening and what continues to happen. And so to me, there is always a question of, if you've got to say something cool, say it. But at the end of the day, can you say it for what you are actually known for and building a public profile around yourself for, as an artist, as a singer, as a performer?
Frank, when you have this idea of, you know, I'm going to wrap it up pretty soon. When you have this idea of wanting to make a strong statement as an institution, and understanding that it might in fact ruffle some feathers, how do you navigate that? Because you have to say, you know, is it a principles thing? Because it's not you personally, Frank, that's saying this. This is the institution's representation of what we believe as an institution. How do you juggle that? Because you know that you can get some backfire from that.
Right. I mean, you know, again, I'll default to what Andrew said. You know, saying it through art, because art inherently should be political, should speak truth to power, should have us think about things in ways we hadn't previously thought of them. So it should challenge us, and it should challenge maybe some beliefs of the establishment. And so, we've been commissioning a lot of work that is intensely personal and about identity, from artists who have not historically been represented in our company, in opera and classical music. And you're going to see more of that. We should see more of that. And that's going to transcend being entertainment for people and be really an art experience. And it's going to challenge, it's going to ruffle feathers, I think. And again, you have to kind of make it a respectful dialogue and find the way to bring people together to, hear from people who don't have the same experience that they have. And that,
Yeah.
and it requires a little bit of fearlessness. It's going to require a little bit of fearlessness. And we're doing this in the midst of a pandemic, right? So there's a lot of planning going on about what do we all get back to? And are we going back to the way things were, or are we going forward to something different? And that's both from a safety perspective and from a what we're programming perspective and who our audience is. All of it's going to change. You gotta just, again, I'll go back to the word truth. There's got to be truth to what we're trying to achieve. We may lose some people on the way, and we may gain some people on the way. And hopefully we'll all still be here, right? Safe and relatively solvent. That would be nice.
As we're going to wrap up in a second, but if you guys would, both of you, thank you, first of all, for being here and sharing your insight and your wisdom, because I think it's a very important aspect, PR and social media in our careers, especially today, with COVID or without COVID. I think, the accessibility of social media and that connection to artists and institutions and how we market, how we sell, how we disseminate information, all of that stuff is really, 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 really important. And so it's great to have some good things that people can go away with to help them have a better online presence and also have better PR and social media engagement. If you can, briefly, both of you, if you can give me 3 do's and one don't of social media, if that's possible, I think that would be great for the people that are listening, for them to be able to say, okay, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And now this is only your opinion, but if you can give 3 do's and one don't, or would you rather 2 do's and 2 don'ts? Whatever you want to, but some do's and some don'ts of social media, if you can do that, and PR. Let's start with you, Frank.
Okay, do's, be yourself. If you have a voice, don't have a social media voice and like a real person voice. Like, try to have your voice in your social media. Definitely, like, engage with the greater industry, right? Like, here's my plug for, like, if you're coming to an Opera Philadelphia performance or you're in an Opera Philadelphia performance, engage with the company's social media. We will be engaging back with you, bounce things off one another, have conversations, and just make it a two-way street and not just a here's what I think, here's what I think, here's what I think. Don't opera's probably not a place for a lot of trash talk. You know,
Well, everybody would agree with you there, but yeah.
save that for fantasy football. You know, like I had a really bad fantasy football year, Andrew, but I did beat Larry. I did at least beat Larry this season.
Oh, I thought you said no place for trash talk. Yikes.
Wait a minute.
Like that.
Let's put it in context, though, Frank. You beat me 1 week.
Yes.
But
you had a much better record than I did.
I made it
You
to
made
the
the playoffs. I
playoffs,
did not.
and I almost pulled it off. But in the semifinals, David Devan beat me, and so it's
Two-time champion David Devan.
yeah, two-time David.
Canada,
How does that happen?
Does not follow the NFL. Two-time champion.
The
I wish I
metrics.
could say we're just getting out of his way and letting him win because he's the boss. Not true at all. We're all trying to beat him, but he's just got it.
I was in the championship last year. Okay, I was in the championship and I lost to Liz Brayton. I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I made it far again this year and then I lost. But my time's coming, and I know people know that I am a force to be reckoned with in fantasy football and Opera Philadelphia's league. So
we got off topic there, but those were my leave the trash talk in the fantasy football realm. There we go.
There you go. Andrew, why don't you wrap it up for us?
To do all dues. For artists, like especially young artists, but at any stage of your career, do think about your story. Like it is, and your publicity and your branding and all these things. So often, especially in the conservatory training, like you're taught how to become a great singer and a great artist from a performance standpoint, but you're not really taught how to tell your story and differentiate yourself from the many other great singers. And at the end of the day, one of the harshest realities of our industry at present is that your music is not enough. And there are so many amazing artists who don't end up having careers because they can't get people to buy into their story and get excited about their story as well as their art, and they don't get differentiated. So think about your story and get comfortable telling it. If you can't tell it, then nobody else is going to tell it for you. And do your publicity. This is one of the greatest changes of the last 15 years, is that artists can do their own PR, especially again in the early stages of their career, by doing things like what Frank was saying. Like when you're singing, when you're performing somewhere, get in touch with the department eight weeks in advance, and the same way that I do for my clients, and just say, hey, here's my story. I would love to, talk to you guys and see if there's anything in any way I can help by doing interviews or by doing Instagram takeover, etc. Be proactive. Don't be a squeaky, obnoxious wheel about it, and realize again that these guys have a lot of stuff to do, but reach out, follow up once, and then move on. But at the very least, doing that and having your story lined up will go a long way. And third, with social media, learn how to parse the analytics, the data of your social media, and see what posts are successful and what aren't, and adapt your strategy, your content strategy accordingly, and try to come up with a strategic approach to content. If one of your story points is about activism, then you should post content that speaks to that and that speaks to that storytelling. And you should do it in a focused way. So, and if those posts don't perform, then try to think of other ways to do content. So those would be three of my most important do's.
Really quickly, Andrew, everybody doesn't have a publicist, okay?
Very true.
When is the right time for a person to get a publicist?
I would say two different criteria that I base it on. If you have enough of a career that is sort of ascendant enough that you have too much going on, too many PR requests, and you need help just kind of handling that and structuring that story. And if you have enough publicizable things going on that in major markets where there is PR, where there are media outlets to be promoted to, then it is worth having a publicist, even if it's just for a season or two, to make sure that they are maximizing the results of those engagements and those projects. Because again, and you can leverage, by doing what I was just saying and what Frank was saying, you can leverage the institutions and the PR like Frank at the institution. But the fact of the matter is, no slight to you, Frank, but you guys don't work for the artists. And when you have a publicist who works just for you, they're going to push that much harder, and they're going to do the work, go above and beyond, hopefully, if they're good. So to me, those are the two. That's really when it makes sense to get a publicist. And I always suggest, especially for younger artists, if you've never hired a publicist before, talk to as many as you can. Even do like paid hour consultations with them, because it can be very hard in early stages of your career to know a good publicist from a bad one. But when you talk to them and you see how they work and you see how they think, it becomes a lot clearer whether it's a fit or not.
And very briefly, Frank, everybody doesn't have a publicist. So when they come to you, they can be all over the place. How can people streamline themselves when they're young and trying to get going so they can make your job easier when they bring their information and material to you, because they don't have an Andrew Owsley, they don't have, someone else that is their person that gets, they may even be skittish and all over the place. What can they do to kind of do this so that your job is easier done because they have themselves together?
Yeah, I mean, frequently an artist will come in they'll have a bio, right? They'll have a headshot, they'll have some basic assets, but, we might have spent a month together as a show is rehearsing, and maybe I've brought some stories, like, hey, would you do this interview, or would you do this? And then we're halfway through a run, and suddenly it's like, oh, by the way, did I tell you this? And it's like, whoa, it's too late. It's too late for me to know this. I can't get that story placed in the next 3 days. So having those goals in mind up front and just expressing them, like, hey, I'm doing this role debut with you here at this company. It's really going to be a big deal in my career, and I would really love to tell this part of my story. If you can just like tell the person in my role that, because it may just start the wheels turning, or we may have an idea in mind about we know that somebody's doing a role for the first time, or is coming off some big part of their career and now is moving into doing it with us, and but I had not thought about it as much as someone like Andrew, who is on your payroll, would have thought about it, right? Or if you don't have an answer yet, right? Yeah. Like I may have given a little bit of thought about it, but absolutely, I want you to utilize me as an asset. But yeah, you've got to come in up front and don't feel like you're being pushy, right? Like,
well, that's the thing.
Go to the people, ask for like a meeting. Come to the office and not just in the scramble in the rehearsal hall where you're passing over 5 minutes.
Build those
relationships. We're looking to tell not just the company's story, but the company's story in the context of an artist's story and our communities, how it fits in our community. But yeah, you've got to find the people at the right time and really focus them in.
But you're encouraging them to say something, because many people coming into the opera for the first time, young singers, they're just so afraid of making a mistake, of doing something wrong. They're like frightened that something's not going to go right. They don't have the wherewithal to say, hey, I'd love to talk to you about this idea. They're like, I don't want to be late, and I want to make sure I do this, and I want the maestro to like me, and all this other stuff. They're fearful, but you're telling them to speak up and really express themselves, because that's going to help them, essentially.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, those, as a young artist, you come in, the maestro, your director, maybe the head of the company, you're trying to establish these relationships and
to get rehired.
Them, so you might not even be thinking about these things, or you might not even pick out of the crowd who's the marketing person again, who's doing social media. But identify them. If this is something that's important to you, if you're at a point in your career where this is something you want to build on, identify that person, the people in those roles, and just ask to have a conversation, ask how it works at that company, express what your goals are, and ask how you can help achieve the institution's goals. And usually it's all hand in hand.
Yep.
Yeah, and Andrew, would you tie it up at the end?
I mean, I tie it up by saying 100%, and like but if you need to get comfortable telling your story and talking about yourself, and part of that comes with doing it, but recognizing that these guys will welcome you coming to them, but you can be much more helpful if you know your story points. Your musical ones, like, I focus in bel canto because I fell in love with it as a kid. You know, your extra musical ones, like, I also build and ride motorcycles across the US, whatever, like, and everything in between. But if you can have those like written out and explain them to the PR and marketing departments, and then get them excited about them, it will change, especially for young artists, it will change the development, the trajectory of your career.
Wow, that's great stuff. Both of you. This has just been wonderful insight, wonderful information, and I hope it's been helpful to my listeners tonight. This is something that we need to know, we need to understand, we need to be better at it, and so I'm glad that you both came on here to share your expertise with my listeners. So thank both of you. I really, really, really appreciate you being here with me tonight.
Pleasure, Larry.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Thank you so much. And everyone, the next the next one is going to be a good one. The next one is critics. We will be talking to the critics on the 24th of February. That one's going to be we're going to have Anthony Tomasini of the New York Times. We're going to have F. Paul Driscoll of Opera News, and we will have David Shingold of many, many leading publications. And so we're going to talk about journalists and critics and their impact on our industry. So make sure you tune in on February the 24th for another episode of the Sit Down with LB Inside the Industry. Everyone have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for being here tonight.